Shabbat Shalom. In this week's Parshat Huqat, we have one of the stories that has proved the most challenging to Meforshim, to interpreters of the Torah for generations. The story of Mei Meriva. The Jews complain once again that they're thirsty, they want water. Moshe receives instructions to speak to the rock, and the rock will bring out water. Instead, when he comes to the rock and all the assembly is gathered there to see the divine response to their cry, Moshe speaks to them in harsh language, Shimu Nahamorim, listen to me, you rebellious people. And then, instead of speaking to the rock, he hits the rock. The water eventually does gush out and people drink. But the Torah then tells us that this was a sin, and for this reason Moshe and Aaron will not accompany the Jewish people into the land of Israel. The Meforshim have been racking their brains and using their creative powers to explain just what happened, why Moshe hit the rock, what's the difference between speaking to the rock and hitting the rock, and why this crime, this event was so serious that Moshe received the punishment. Moshe and Aaron received the punishment that they did. I wanted to share with you some things I heard from a shiur recorded by the Rav decades ago, with, as usual, some original insights. And in the end, I will have a few remarks of my own about the Rav's discussion, and maybe, things of my own. So now first, how does the Rav explain the story and Moshe's behavior? Well, if we compare the way Moshe reacted to this episode and some of the earlier episodes, particularly those right after the Jewish people were taken out of Egypt and Rephidim and even the golden calf, we see a huge difference. In the earliest episodes, Moshe was ready to defend the Jewish people vigorously before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and pray intensely that they not really be punished for their rebellious behavior. But here, we don't see him putting on the same vigorous defense, and indeed, we see he himself becoming angry with the Jewish people. And the Rav points out that if in our Parsha, with the Mei Meriva, these waters of dispute, Moshe got angry. In the next week's Parsha, Balak, when the Jews succumbed to the Benot Midian, we see for the first time, maybe the only time, Moshe actually crying at the end of the Parsha. Why is this? The Rav's explanation is, I think, terrific. In the earliest episodes, it was clear that Moshe had taken out of Egypt a group of slaves, a riffraff. There was the Asaf Suf and the Erevav, but even the Bnei Yisrael were just a few days ago slaves, were deeply involved in the flesh pots of Egypt, were totally uneducated, and so he knew that you couldn't expect them overnight to become loyal, disciplined, and well-behaved people, and basically this was what motivated him, gave him the patience not to react in any anger and to defend the Jews vigorously. But the events in our Parsha, next week Parsha, are taking place after that whole generation has passed on, and the people who are complaining and rebelling are the people who were brought up by Moshe, his Talmidim, people who received the Torah at Sinai and received intense instruction, as it's explained in the Mishnah, from Moshe and Aaron and all the rest on almost a daily basis for nearly 40 years. And yet when you look at the language of their complaints, it's almost the exact same language that was used by their parents when right after leaving Egypt. Lama halitanu me'eretz Mitzrayim. Why did you take us out of Egypt? You promised us a land of milk and honey, and we're here in the desert. As if nothing had happened. Moses Moshe Rabbeinu felt that he had simply failed as a teacher. It was his job not only to be to lead the people, but to lead them pedagogically, to be the teacher, to teach people about what about the Torah and what life is all about. And here, with this new generation, people who were born into freedom or were only children when they left Egypt, and had decades of intense instruction from the greatest teacher of all, Moshe Rabbeinu, as if nothing had happened. So this was why Moshe was so bitterly disappointed. This is why he got angry. And this is why in the next week's parsha, he actually cried to see the people that you have invested so many years and years and years of teaching behave as if nothing had happened. They had absorbed nothing. They were resisting you along the way, and when it comes to a situation in which your mettle is tested, they act as just like the group of freed slaves. This was very, very disappointing. Moshe felt that he had simply failed as a teacher. So now moving on to the punishment Moshe received and the subsequent developments. In terms of the punishment, the Rav says that this is basically golus, that Moshe Rabbeinu, will die in golus, will not enter Eretz Yisrael, and he cites in this connection the halacha given in the Rambam. It's not controversial with regard to Arei Miklat, these cities of refuge, where people who have killed in a manner that's, I guess we would call it manslaughter or something like that, not premeditated murder, but something which probably indicates some failing on their part. That when someone is sentenced to go to the Ir Miklat, his Rebbe has to go along with him, because apparently there's some failing in the teaching that this man received that led him to get involved in this fatal accident, let's call it. And similarly, because the generation that Moshe Rabbeinu did not take out of Egypt were not worthy of entering Eretz Yisrael, so Moshe, their Rebbe, also had to remain in Golus. There are some issues with this, which I'll come back to at the end, but the Rav then takes it off on a very different tack, and it's not the first time he does this. He talks about the Mashiach, Messianism, that if Moshe Rabbeinu had taken the Jews into the land of Israel, then the Beis HaMikdash that would have been built and never would have been destroyed, and this Jewish, kingdom, Mamlechet Kol Magoy Kadosh, would have maintained itself, and we would have, avoided all the years of exile and persecution and destruction. And this is a theme that the Rav, as I said, has taken up more than once in these talks, and I find it very interesting because these are talks from like the 1970s, maybe the early 1980s. It's before, I think the Lubavitch and the Chabad, we want Mashiach now, and before, as today, in Israel, Mashiachiyut, Messianism, has become a political slur that's slung along with the rest of the mud in so-called political discourse here in Israel. And here the Rav is very interested in this and spends a lot of time talking about it. And I'd like to, the final segment of this talk, say a few things about it. So as I said, I have a few problems with some of the things that the Rav brought up. For example, he made the point that the Moses real Talmidim were not the generation that came out of Egypt and were condemned to die in the desert, because these were the people who were freed slaves and were apparently never able to bring themselves up to the level that was wanted or required. But the generation that rebelled here in Mei Mariva and the other incidents that come up in here in the latter part of Sefer Bamidbar were the people who entered Eretz Yisrael. Maybe not all of them. Some of them, were perished in the punishments that are described. But I think that's, this is not quite splitting hairs, but I think the Rav's point is well taken, that the leader had to, like the captain goes down with his ship, and the leader had to accept the fact that he too would not bring the people into the land of Israel. The Rav's, I said, involvement with Messianism and the Mashiach is extremely interesting to me, because I don't recall this being, like as I said, a major theme in his talk. He wasn't always talking about the Mashiach, and when he would give a talk, it's not like a Hasidic drush where whatever you're talking about, you end by talking about that should have a gula shleim on the Mashiach should come quickly. Yet in this and other talks, he has a lot to say about the Mashiach, that the Melech Mashiach, the Rambam tells us, will be close to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu in prophecy. Moshe would be even greater than the Mashiach in prophecy. And this, of course, again, is something that's well understood if we know the role of Moshe Rabbeinu and the importance for his uniqueness. The Torah says, "Lo kama Moshe b'Yisrael navi k'Moshe," and for the Rambam, in his context, with the resisting Islam and the claim that the Torah was abrogated, the Naskh, as it's called in Arabic, it's extremely important that Moshe be the greatest prophet ever, no one before or after. But again, these are side issues. The fact that the Rambam that Rabbi Soloveitchik was talking about Mashiach at this particular time is very interesting. I said, now, if Messianism means trying to force the hand of history and bring on a utopia even before it's appropriate, as a lot of people would say, and therefore messianic movements generally end in disaster, then I think that in the Israeli context today, where Mashiachiyut is a political slur, along with Gizanut and other terms that have been devoid of all meaning and are just more mud to be slung, the people who call the religious Zionists Mashiachistim should take a good look in the mirror, because the Oslo debacle and the disaster that it brought upon Jewish people, trying to, in one fell swoop, bring this era of peace and prosperity, is one of the perfect example of a failed messianic gesture, for which you paid a high price in blood. But I won't talk about that either, and I will just go back and end with the final point about the Rav. The Rav says that even though Moshe Rabbeinu was certainly the most qualified person to be the Mashiach, the coming of the Mashiach and the Messianic age, it depends mostly on the people being ready for the Mashiach. And the Rav even gives a number. He says it's 90% a function of the readiness of the people. And when the Rav says, that suggests that Moshe was a failed teacher, and Moshe, he said, was not a failed teacher, but he was simply speaking at a level which the people he was talking to could not appreciate. He was too high above. Of course, this means eventually that his teaching could not be absorbed. But in the end, the moral lesson, I think, of the Rav's talk is clear, relevant, and true. That really the Geula depends on the people's being ready for the Geula, and not ready in the Chabad sense. Chabad says, why do we know the Mashiach is coming soon? Because everyone's talking about the Mashiach. And why is everyone talking about the Mashiach? Because Chabad is talking about the Mashiach. No, not this kind of stuff. I'm talking about something much more serious. That, to make ourselves ready, make ourselves receptive to serious Torah learning, receptive to serious and meaningful and substantive discussions of the basic principles and outlook of Yadus, which of course I find in the Rambam and in the Rav and in these great figures. But I'm just sharing you my inclinations, and it's depends on us. So let's people get ready. People get ready by starting to get serious. And have a good Shabbos and hit the like button if you want.